Hey, Mike,
Hey, how's it going, Derek?
we have a crowded room today. Look at that.
Hey,
That
we're in
whole
better company
screen
than normal.
is full of band directors. So, uh, good morning, guys. If people don't know, I've taken the names off the screen, so I'm going to introduce my good friend Daniel Todd. Dan,
Uh,
entire career in Crane.
yes, sir.
So, how many years did you spend middle school and then high school in Crane?
I was a third assistant for 1 year, then middle school band director for 9, and then high school director for 20.
Wow, congrats on that. And
Thank
my
you.
other, I'm excited to have my other friend Jason Brents, Mr. Brents. Um, actually have Crane connections, but I think spent most of your time in the Metroplex, right?
I did. I My first year was at Coyle Middle School with Marcy Saputo, and then 3 years there with Daniel and Crane as the middle school director. 5 years at Capel Middle School East, and then 3 years at the Colony High School, and my last 5 years were there at Lee High School.
Well, and then everybody knows our good friend Mike has got 30. He's told us before 32, 33,
Something like that. It was like a prison sentence.
bouncing around
Got
Central
out
West
with good
Texas.
behavior.
So, all right, we have all these people because we got an email to the Ask Mike email. If you have questions, we certainly welcome you to send that. It's just Ask Mike, all one word, all lowercase. Ask Mike at intunemusic.com. So, in the video portion, I'm sure Rick will put that up so you can see that. But Ask Mike at intunemusic.com. And our question reads like this. It says, middle school band director here. I feel like that's a long distance Casey Kasem. Middle school band director here. And I was
I don't get
wondering,
that reference.
all right, already with the old jokes? Is that um, long distance dedication? Casey Kasem, they're great. But the person says, I was wondering, what is your approach for choosing literature for ensembles, UIL, festivals, honor band, fall spring concerts? Kind of left it wide open there. Do you have a checklist of sorts to thin the pile and a more specific criteria for each type of performance group? The natural inclination is to toss a piece completely if it isn't ideal fit. If you select more difficult piece for a group, how long do you let it ride before admitting failure, moving on to another piece? So there's a ton of questions going on there, but the basic premise is, how do I choose music? And I think in this scenario, Daniel, be nice to the cat.
Of course,
Uh,
that's me. Of course.
but the basic premise is, and I think for our scenario is in the gist of the Ask Mike, how do I help my band be better? Let's kind of um, focus on picking music for your band in the life in our real life situation. As we record this, we're kind of moving out of a marching season, heading into winter concerts. I still call them Christmas concerts, but maybe pointing towards our spring. So in Texas, we have they've changed the name of it. We used to call it concert and sight reading contest. I think they call it evaluation now because that makes everybody feel better. But um, listen, I got to tell you, that's probably or could be one of the more daunting things that we do as a young director or as a director that's out there on their own and doesn't have a lot of people around that they feel like they might be able to ask. So I'm going to ask you, and just to get conversation started, I'll start. Let's just start with Mike and kind of move around. The first thing you're thinking of when you're staring at a PML, going, "Huh, I'm supposed to pick one of these." Thoughts?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is a couple of quotes from very close mentors of mine that I'm sure they heard it from someone else. But one is, you pick your rating when you pick your program. So that's how important this is. I really believe you do pick your rating when you pick your program. And the other one is, play what you can at contest, Play what you want to play at the spring concert. Play what you wish you could play only inside the walls of your band hall. If you follow those rules, I think it kind of opens it up. But yeah, it's a process that they don't really teach you what to do in college in that scenario. They do, but they have so many things they've got to cover but it's probably one of the most prime important skills there is. And I don't know about the other two guys on the panel here, but I had lots of help in picking programs, but then I was obstinate enough that I decided to do some things I wanted to do, and I was burned. I got burned real quick on some of that. So I'll throw that to my compadres and see what they think.
Um, you know, with regards to this, we have talked about, and Derek and I have talked about, at contests and thinking, man, if they hadn't picked this, why would they do so? Mike's right in that it's so important picking in it, and it is very difficult, especially for the young veteran. And what I want to get across is getting plenty of help, asking plenty of people and asking the right people that
I think that's it.
Have success. I've talked to people after contests, and they have me finish their band, and I'm like, why did you pick that? And they're going, well, my buddy told me about it, and he really liked it. But then when I go and look, and that person may or may not have had very much success either. And I was like Mike, I had a lot of help, but I was also very, very good about, I wasn't embarrassed to ask questions, and I would just literally call up people I didn't really have great relationships with or know them very well, but I saw that in years past they had played this, and I wanted to know about it. And picking for your group is so important. But I'm going to say this, and other people have different ideas, but to a young band director, I'm all about getting some success first. Pick and get some success. You can get your students behind you after the success, and get your parents and your admin behind you after you've had some success. And then it gives you some more freedom to do what things you want to do, and harder things and difficult. But if you don't pick it right, there's almost nothing you can do. And we've all been in these positions where we're going, you should have just scrapped this, or why didn't you ask before? We get asked to clinics, and it's 2 weeks to contest, and we're going, we're in a huge amount of trouble. So ask early. I don't, not too many names, but I have had some people in the past where it's easier now with the internet thing, and they would just send me recordings of them reading, and they're like, hey, we read this piece. One, if you do you know anything about this piece? Two, what do you, just by hearing, we're practically sight reading this piece. And people would tell me, I'd pick a piece and I'd say, what do you think about this piece? And they're like, well, if you can spin, can your band play that middle thrill section? And do you realize how much time it's going to be? And your middle school is going to have trouble. And I was looking at notes and rhythms. I'm going, this doesn't look that bad. And they were able to help me and guide me through. But if you don't ask the questions, you can get into some real deep water really quick. So my big thing is ask questions, but ask the right people. Ask the people that have had success. Ask people that have been doing it a little while. You can ask people that are friends of yours and everything else, but make sure you're asking the right people early on in the process.
I might say, don't ask the yes men. Is that a way to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Jason, what do you think, man?
No, I totally agree. Selecting a program is an art or a skill that has to be developed. So if you're
Right.
not asking
I'm glad
and
you said that.
asking early, I mean, what these gentlemen are saying, I mean, I've been in several band halls over the course of the last couple of years where I've encouraged kids or teachers, not kids, to get me out earlier because, you bring a clinician the last 2 weeks and you've overprogrammed. I mean, that cake is baked. There's
Yep.
really not a whole lot that I can do. I mean, I can point out the things that need to be fixed, but you've run out of time. So, I mean, for me, the two things that I think are critical, and you may not know either one of these things. The first is knowing what you're capable of teaching, and I don't think I was able to really understand that until year 7, 8, 9. But I had the benefit of being surrounded by private teachers who were former band directors that I was constantly bouncing ideas off of and helped, steer me in the right direction. The second thing that I think you have to have a good understanding of is what are my kids capable of? And you can look at a score if the range of your trumpets or what your weaknesses are. That's how I approach selecting everything. I took my weakest section and I would grab a score that I thought might fit us, and I would just flip looking at the flutes if that was my weak section. And if I got to a 20 or 30 minutes measure section, it's like, I can't do this. Even if everybody else in the band can do this, you know, the flutes are going to cost me a rating because I'm not going to be able to get that taught in the time that I have. So knowing what you're capable of, and if you don't know, asking them early, and then knowing what your strengths and weaknesses in your ensemble and what your kids are capable of, and not over programming. And I think another thing, especially with small school and even some of the bigger school people that I'm talking to that are having issues with kids showing up for sectionals, with small school, it's, my kids are gone all the time because they're gone to basketball, they're gone to baseball. Like, that has to be a big part of the conversation. It's not just, in a perfect world where I have my kids in my class every day, we can play this program. Well, you may not have those kids in your class. So having that big picture view of how much time am I going to be missing is also a huge component to programming.
Cool. So I'm going to touch a few things that you guys said because I want to make sure. I thought they were great points. First of all, if you're watching this, Jason is not driving.
Maybe.
He pulled over on the side of the road just for us. Um, but one of the things that I heard that I think is critical to get in your brain is this is a skill. This is not throwing darts at a dartboard and whatever you land on, oh, well, I guess that's what I'll play. A second thing that I think I heard that, oh, and to follow that up, as a skill, you get better at it as you do it. But I think that I will say as you do it intentionally. Another thing that I heard was it's okay to read just about anything. Now, Daniel, you didn't say it that way. I think you need to be realistic as you're putting music in front of your kids. But would you guys, yay or nay? That's one way you kind of figure out where your kids are if you haven't been there very long. Or I always say this in the middle school situation, you really don't have that performing caliber group very long. I mean, you kind of get in some schools your top group, you got them 1 year and then they move on.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you kind of have to know what you've got coming up, or as Jason said, the strengths of the group. But so I'm going to follow that up. That's and listen, you guys have heard me say this ad nauseum. I think that so many of us that we've created an online culture, we've created an internet world. We don't go face to face with people very often. We all grew up with I'll call them mentors or people we respected who would look at us and go, "What the hell are you thinking? You put what? You're not really considering that, right?" So yeah, you guys have been in that situation before. I'm just looking at your faces, but should Listen, different classifications in the state of Texas have a different list that they can read from. We grade them, grade one, two, three, four, and five. And if you are this classification, you are required to play certain pieces of this grade list, certain pieces off this grade list, et cetera, et cetera. So, should I, as a young teacher, or even an experienced teacher who just apparently haven't quite figured out how to do this yet because I'm bullheaded or because I just don't want to ask somebody, should I find the grade PML list and just start listening to pieces? Most of this is on the internet now. You can go to the publisher and they'll have an example of that music. Because here's where I would screw up. I would say, man, we played this in high school. It's one of my favorite pieces I ever played before. I think I'll try it with my band. I don't think that's probably the smartest way to do it. Or as Daniel said, one of your buddies go, God, that's a cool piece of music, and has nothing to do with your band. So move us forward. We've and I'm going to say this just so I can say one thing that sounds smart. Sometimes Daniel said this. I think Mike uses the word lyrical. The less notes it has, the more it should scare you in some of those sections. But so we've determined that we need to ask somebody. We've determined that we should be critical in our thinking. What's my first step to critically pick a piece of music? I know,
I think
Jason,
you hit it.
you kind of did that, Jason, with the look at your group. I think that's excellent. What's your weakest section? Look through the entire score for that section. But what else, Mike?
Oh, I was just going to say to reemphasize, do not pick a tune just because you think it's one you've always wanted to play.
Right.
And I've done that. And choose a piece that will fit your band. And it's not really the same as choosing something you can make a one on. I know that seems contradictory, but you know what piece of music really fits your band, and then you can make it to where it'll make a first division or be a top-notch performance at the evaluation, whatever we want to call it. But I don't pick my pieces based on what I can make a one on. I pick on what can fit my band the best, which transitions into the possibility of making a one. Because sometimes I've seen directors get caught up in, if I pick this piece because it's super easy and this is easy for my band to play, then the kids get no educational value, and you get this trapezoid shaped trophy that gathers dust, and the kids all quit band. So there's a fine line in there where you want it to be where the kids can achieve, but I've seen directors go so far the opposite direction that it's kind of scary. It's the kids are just bored to tears. I'll go do a clinic, and every piece you call up, the director calls up, they all go, nobody goes, oh, we get to play that today, and the kids have to be challenged, and if they're challenged a little bit enough, then they'll be interested in what they're doing. I just want to kind of put that out there.
I
And
think you're kind of hitting the gray area there is when's it challenging and when am I over programming?
Yeah, and that's why you have multiple pieces in the folder. I'll have 6 or 7 pieces that are potential for being played at contest. Another real important point, which I want to make sure this gets in there somewhere, there is no requirement in Texas UIL band that you have to play a lyrical piece. That is not a requirement. And so many young directors, because they generally came from really good programs, that's why they became band directors. That makes sense. They say, oh, we play a march, and then we play a really pretty ballad, and then we play some kind of piece, overture, ABA oriented piece at the end.
The
There's no
big closer,
requirement for
right?
that. You can play an easy march with 6 notes in it, and then you can play Hounds of Spring if you wanted to. There's no requirement for any lyrical pieces. So I just want to throw that in there, and then I'll toss it over to Jason or Daniel.
Oh, I completely agree. It really just depends on, well, to tag on to what Derek was saying a while ago about mentors, and to tie that into what Mike just said. Derek, our friend Rusty Gray, I don't think he would have a problem with me sharing this story. When he was at Bonham, he said that he would spend a lot of time picking his program, and Mr. McIntyre, who was the fine arts director at the time, would come over and look at it and look at him and say, "Do I need to tell Charlie to roll over?" Basically saying, "Are you aiming for Mr. Nail's job at Permian?" Saying that it was too hard. But then he would try to overcorrect and pick something that was a little bit more mindful and easier. And Mr. Nail would or Mr. McIntyre would come over and say, "So you're just going to take it easy this year? What's the deal?" And so Rusty came to realize that, to your point, Mike, like, we have to develop these kids, and we want to give them something that's going to allow them to grow as an ensemble and grow as players. So picking something that's so easy that we're just worried about our first division is not really doing justice to the kids, or to your program, for that matter. I mean, I always wanted to make sure that I was picking the best music that I knew that I could teach, and I wanted it right at that line, like to your point, Mike, of being able to push them and get some growth out of them and out of me as a director. Because as you start playing more challenging music, your ability to teach and your understanding of what you can accomplish grows too. So I totally agree with that.
But Dan, I'm going to come back to your point. I know you've got other things to say, but I do think it's important for our young directors. It may not be. Don't look at it as I'm taking an easy route. You got to get some confidence in this game before you can really get going. So I don't know that if I don't know the kids very well. It's my first year in town. Let's just pick a solid contest, roster, and let's do things that we all sound good on. And as you get more comfortable and they get more confidence in you, then you can probably start. Is that kind of what you were saying earlier, Dan?
Yeah, I definitely think, as you get better, as you get success, that it makes it a lot easier as the kids get behind you and say, hey, he's putting this out there, but he believes in us, and he or she can get us to where we need to be and admin and this is why we need people in rehearsal, and so but you got to build that up, and it takes time. And I was never play just the easiest music you can to get a one to go off. What they're talking about, I would, if I had weak trumpets and I knew that, and I could say, hey, I got to go down to my middle school. We got to get something harder in the trumpets and get them working and build their technique up. But what I didn't do is, stuff like, hey, my clarinet tone is terrible and I got to fix that. So I'm going to pick a feature that has this huge clarinet section in it because the tone wise. So you got to know what you can fix and where to fix it, and push where you need to, but make it attainable, and knowing. He's very right. If I may pick this piece because I'm trying to get my trumpets better, but I know I have to pick easier in my march in order for me to do that. If I want to push here on that piece, I got to pick easier here, and there is no requirement for lyrical, but I've seen so many people that they pick a lyrical piece and they just didn't spin. And they didn't understand the time and the difficulty of making that sound good. I remember a story when I was a young director and I was picking music, and there was a piece called "They Led My Lord Away," and one of the older directors said, "Oh, I hear you're going to play 'They Led My One Away,'" and I was just and I'll tell you what, I took that as, man, I know this person and that they know what they're talking about, and we're going on. We're picking a different piece on that level of group. Not to say you couldn't do it later or so forth, but it is, you can push, and I am in favor of pushing, but pushing in the right way, planning it out to where, hey, I can push here, but in order to push here, I gotta think here and 3 steps ahead, and asking when you're playing, you're usually playing something you haven't played before, and each piece is different. I can't tell you how many pieces I've played that as we got going and as the kids started learning these runs, things started getting worse. And I'm going, what is going on? And I would usually have that information. I'd find someone, a good band or a good director that had done that and pushed it. I'd call them up and say, what can you tell me about this piece? What am I going to experience as we go? What are the pitfalls here? Hey, I heard this piece. It sounds incredible, but I haven't taught it, and I need to talk to someone who has, and that I trust that can tell me. And your band doesn't have the tone to play that piece. So I'm going to go back to asking questions and asking questions early. And when you do push your band, just push it in a way that makes sense. And all mapped out. And I'm going to give this much attention. I'm going to have to give a lot of attention here. So I got to have my marks to where we can get it and get it pretty quick. So
this is one of my favorite examples of this. And if I'm going to be careful, I guess, how I say this. But there was a time period when Hymn Song of Philip Bliss, everybody loved the piece. Everybody wanted, and they say, I've got an awesome French horn. I'm going to play Hymn Song of Philip Bliss. And never even stopped to consider the clarinet choir underneath it, that how many times I sat through an evaluation and went, oh, that's just, how did you not hear that over the last 6 weeks or whatever? So again, such a beautiful melody, and if you got a good horn player, you just, as a brass guy, I'm just like, God, that is beautiful. I love it. But all things considered, might not have been the right. And all it took was one person coming to listen or asking one person, what's going to be the hard part of this? And they say, well, if your clarinets can't open that right, you're sunk from the get go. So, so far our common theme seems to be: don't isolate yourself. Don't pretend you're hearing things you're not. Ask people. And I like how each of you has said, ask people ahead of time what the pit. Don't let the hard spots catch you off guard. Here's a kind of an off-topic question. I'm going to ask it anyway. In my opinion, we seem to have gotten and I don't want to offend anybody that might happen to somehow hear this. Don't go say, hey, did you hear what he said? We seem to have gotten pretty faddish, if I can use that word, in composers or in, this guy's writing a lot of stuff that seems to fit this grade level, and a whole bunch of people are playing. Is there a danger in playing it because everybody's playing it, or because it's a popular piece, or, I'll even. This is not necessarily what I'm trying to say, but like Moscow 41, everybody, I've heard that forever. But does that mean that there's a reason that it's a good contest piece for a young band? Or is that just a popularity thing? Is it you know what I'm saying? Do you hear what I'm asking there at all? I might not have voiced it well, but.
Jason, you want to take that one?
I think it's a little bit of both. I do agree that a lot of these composers are writing more for bands because they can sell,
it's what they do.
More copies of, yeah. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think that we live in an age where, middle school, small school bands have quite a large breadth of literature that they can choose from. And I think that just makes the whole, it makes it easier in one way because you have so much more to choose from, but it can also make it more difficult because you have a lot more to go through. A lot of people will tell you, be careful playing something that everybody else plays because the judges have a preconceived idea. And I think there is something to that, but I think ultimately, if your band is going to play it and play it well, that would be something that if I was at a middle school or a small school, I would use that as a point of reference. Go and look and see what other people are playing, but look at the score. Don't just listen to the music and see how it fits your ensemble. But no, I do think that is there's definitely a lot more literature out there for younger and smaller bands.
So let me follow that up with this question though. Do you think, and again, I'm not trying, we can't climb in the guys' heads, but You guys tell me because I don't know. Is there a I don't know in the rubric or whatever that a certain we're looking for this technical ability, we're looking for this fundamental stuff that should be happening. Are these guys writing necessarily to emphasize, hey, look, we're making good tones, or to show off, or to teach? In other words, do you think that the people are specifically writing for grade levels and the things that judges are listening for in those grade levels? Or are we just trying to find some? And I ask this on purpose because you can't just pick up any piece of music by anybody. You still have to do the research. You still have to do the homework on it. What does this piece feature? What does this piece seem to emphasize? Uh, was that just a ramble? Did any of that make sense?
Oh, it
Or
makes
is there something we
sense.
can glean from that?
I think there's always been kind of a faddish approach to it. It's what we know as wind band right now in America has only been in existence for about 70 years.
Okay.
So we had our Francis Macbeths and our Claude T. Smiths and our John Zedekliks and our, Alfred Reeds, and now it's the newer generation of people. And I think the difference being, you hit the nail right on the head. The difference was in the older generation, I really feel like they were writing music for the sake of making musical statements. And most of the stuff we see now that's coming out is written to the rubric. It's written to the rubric, where and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, by the way, because it's teaching certain skills, and you can teach certain skills to kids that way. So be careful of that when you're choosing music, to make sure that it's not just some kind of formula piece that'll fall together really easy and you don't have to work very hard on it because it sounds like a movie soundtrack or something, but find, what do you want your band to be able to do by the end of the concert season? What do you want to instill some other things in them other than what the composer did? And that could be a whole nother podcast, is
Right.
what are composers doing on this?
But we're
I
kind of
think
back to
another thing.
Jason's comment of what can I teach? What can they be taught? And how
Yeah,
do we grow
yeah.
together?
Yeah, and the way I kind of got around that, if you want to call it that, was I'd have six, seven, eight pieces in the folder, and the ones that did not make the cut because they ended up being too hard, I would throw one or two of those on the spring concert. That way, the kids didn't feel like it was a waste of time. It was like, oh my gosh, we worked on that for 4 weeks, and now Mr. Lenny just threw it away. It's like, no, no, and especially if it's a piece the kids really like, but it's a little bit beyond their ability, because I think one of the biggest criteria that younger teachers and sometimes older teachers miss is taking into account the amount of rehearsal time you actually have. You can't, you have those surprise days. I always count backwards from contest, and there's always at least four surprise days you knew nothing about. Okay. And there's all those days like testing and different things. We all know what happens on the calendar. And sometimes teachers go, well, that's, if I pick my program now, I've got all this time. You really don't. And then Jason mentioned with sectionals how hard it is. And that's a criteria when you're picking your music too. Are you able to have sectionals? I had to have mine like at 7 in the morning, and they only came like, each section came 2 times during the semester to work on the contest music, because there wasn't time. I couldn't just schedule sectionals, and but some bands can. So that's going to make a difference in your rehearsal time. But to go back to your original question, I really do think that a lot of the stuff nowadays is that's on the list is written per rubric. You know what I mean? It's like that's what it does. And to answer the other question you mentioned, do they think harshly about it? I'll answer this. I've been on a lot of panels. No, we just want to hear music played well. I could care less if Afterburner by Randall Standridge was played 15 times in a row by a group. If every group played it really well, I'm a happy judge, and I'll throw out one there. Tim Husky has a webpage, brenpark.com, and he keeps track of all the UIL pieces that have been played and how many times per year they've been played. And that doesn't mean you pick according to that list, but would you agree that it's probably a piece that works well at evaluation if it's been played the most in grade one? It's worth looking at to see if it
Or
fits
for
your
that
band
age level of
for
student.
that age level,
Yeah.
or it'll do it by classification. So if it's a 6A varsity band, it'll do the pieces that have been played the most. And I'm not saying that should be our only criteria, but I think it doesn't hurt to kind of look that direction.
Yeah, but I think we're also obstinate not to notice that a lot of groups play it and do well with it.
Right. And I
That
remember that Moscow 1941, I was in a director's band at TBA and they just did new music.
right.
And then we played that in the little rehearsal prior to our performance. And we're all band directors, looked at each other and we went, this one's
Yeah.
going to be popular. Because it just was. I mean, it's just kind of a fun piece of music. More fun to play maybe than to listen to for the hundredth time, but still, it's still a really cool little piece of music. And sometimes there is that point where if the kids really like to play it, maybe that's okay too.
Yeah.
No, but Derek, I'd like to touch on that just a little bit because knowing your situation, I always picked. I didn't care what everyone else was playing because every situation is different, and because it's like for my band, I didn't split it up for a first band and a second band. So we had 150 people on stage, and because of that, I couldn't play a lot of the newer stuff. Everyone thought, he's old school. He only does older music, and he only. I did a lot of Clark T. Smith, but I wasn't doing it because I was just old school. I was doing it because of what I had in my situation with 150 kids up there, and this, I couldn't be playing this thin stuff that was written for wind band, and these isolated runs with 150 kids. So I want to go back to just picking for your group and what you think is best and what good people are thinking is best for your program. It is key. And I, I, I was also, and it is good when the kids like the piece. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that because I would read a bunch of stuff, but I was always kind of that I wasn't gonna let the kids pick the music per se. If they liked it, you're right. I would do that on a spring concert, and I got pretty good. I'm going to tell you, as band directors, we're salesmen, and I got to where I could sell that older music, and I could go get a recording of North Texas playing this piece of music that I wanted to play, and I didn't tell them that this was, a study they did and they put out all this older music. I just said, hey, this is North Texas playing this piece of music. And they'd be like, whoa, it must be good that, so you can sell it if it fits your band. And I never, there was a ton of great music that I liked that I would hear other bands play. And this, wind band of 60 at a school near me was playing it. And I was like, man, that is incredible. And that's great. It's just not something I can do doing the things the way we have in this situation. So really situationally thinking about what your band can do. And every situation is different. And that band over there may get sexual. And that band may not have a bunch of athletes in their band. And so I tried not to get caught up, although there was definitely stuff I liked that I didn't find. So pick for your band, and then not something you hear that for everyone's fun. So.
Yeah. So I've seen and may have heard from you guys before. Every once in a while, understanding that my career was built on visiting different band halls for a brief amount of time. But every once in a while, I would have a director that I was visiting. I'd walk in and they just kind of had the cat that ate the canary look on their face, and I'm like, "It's a good day, I'm guessing." He goes, "I think we're going to be able to play. Insert the title here. I've been waiting for a group that could play this song, so I think this is the group." And I'm not saying that as a cautionary. I'm thinking that's cool. That we do have those moments where you've taught where the people that have come into your group have the capability to play something that you've always wanted to play. So every once in a while, isn't that fun? But at the same time, that's probably not every year.
Yeah,
Just to,
sometimes the stars align.
and
Jason?
so I'm going to throw this out. Jace, did you have something you wanted to throw in there?
No, I totally. I mean, it's fun to play for the kids and for you. I mean, it's fun to play a great piece of music. It
Yeah.
just is.
And there are really good music touches everybody, players, listener, everybody involved, and everybody strives for that. I want to feel that all the time. It just doesn't happen all the time. Okay, let's work to where we can get back to that place again. But I was going to throw this at you guys. It's funny, Mike. I don't know if you noticed, both of them said my trumpets aren't good enough to play whatever.
The trumpets are always good enough.
They're
No.
saying the trumpets are like,
At
bring
least we
it.
think we are. Give us procession of the nobles. We're ready, Jason.
But I moved from a large classification school to another when my parents moved me to Houston my junior year, and listen, moved me into a really good up and coming brand new. I was the second graduating class out of the high school that I graduated from. All that to say is there's not a lot of tradition. There's not a lot of history. The feeder schools all got jumbled up. It's kind of like the Wichita Falls thing right now, Mike.
Yeah.
That they have two new high. How does that? Two new high schools.
They got rid of 3 high schools and built 2 brand new ones.
So there is no tradition per se, and the middle schools got jumbled up. The feeder schools got jumbled up.
Mm-hmm.
Having said all that, so I went to this school straight out of a West Texas, what I consider a very strong program that we were very proud to let everybody know that we were a very strong program. And so we get there and listen, I'm not don't hear this wrong. We played Italian in Algiers. And it's a cool piece, but it's very solo oriented. We had a really strong oboe and it had trumpet solos in it, but for the most part, we sat there. And so my question was kind of like, now listening to you guys, did he think everybody else that he was just playing to the strength of the soloists? And I realize that's not a grade 1, grade 2. We're talking higher up the grade tree, but was he saying something there by not letting the rest of us play all the time? Um, and we did well, but I'm coming back to and maybe in the context of this conversation, solos don't matter, but do they matter? Do you have to look at that score and go, "Oh wait, I
Oh,
don't
they
know that I have a
definitely
soloist that could do that."
they definitely matter. My big quote to any band director, marching or concert, is if you don't have a soloist, don't have a soloist.
Well, it's obvious,
Because
but I feel
some
like we need to
directors
say
just
the
force
obvious
the
things.
issue. They're first chair flute, so they should be able to learn this. No, there's a certain swag to a soloist that cannot be taught in 2 months. Even if the kid's a really good technician and a good musician, they might not be a soloist. There's
Right.
there's there's a certain amount of cold-blooded, kind of like a field goal kicker for an NFL team. It's not just the accuracy of kicking, it's the mental game that's being played as
Or
well.
penalty
So
shots in soccer.
yeah,
So,
yeah. So it's
Yeah.
it's it's interesting, to feed that to see how that works.
so I know that
Um,
sounds obvious, but sometimes I think we need to say the obvious things.
yeah, yeah.
So when we're picking music, at least. I mean, some groups, I just went through a series of marching contests leading up to the state contest, and there were some groups out there in the 2A classification that only had 2 trumpets, period. So everything's a
Hmm.
solo. I mean, that's one side. I mean, your concert groups are going to be the same way. You got to look at how exposed, how, trumpet players get this rap of being the hold my beer guys, but if they don't have that mentality, you're just setting them up for failure there. But okay, um, back to our question. One of the things that was asked, and I'm going to ask it a different way. Are you guys implementing this right now? Are we going into Christmas, our winter concerts? Are we sight reading concert music right now? Are we practicing sight reading right now? Are we just taking a breath and doing a winter concert with songs everybody knows?
Jason, you want to jump on that one?
I'm already at this point looking at what I'm looking at doing for UIL, and so I'm not going to put that on the Christmas concert But if I have a piece that I'm doing from UIL and I have a Christmas concert piece that is kind of similar in construction and how it's put together, it's going to give me a great idea of, hey, this Christmas concert piece didn't go very well with the Christmas concert. Maybe I should like relook at this piece that I'm looking for UIL. I mean, for a Christmas concert, you can, take some chances and the parents aren't going to, be any wiser for wears. And, but it'll give you an opportunity to kind of see it, what your group is capable of doing. So, but yeah, everything at this point, there are going to be some things on the Christmas concert you just put on because it's tradition, sleigh ride, Christmas festival, if you're playing those pieces, or things that are just fun that the kids are going to enjoy. But at this point, I'm very deep into looking at what my group is capable of doing and constantly second guessing myself. Are my trumpets going to be able to handle this? This
There's
part.
my band
Are
director
they
friend.
not? Yeah, I mean, it's always a finding that line of, pushing them, picking great pieces of music, but also setting them up for success, whether it's the Christmas concert or whether it's UIL. So.
Yeah, I think that's really an important point. For me, we talked about making strength and weaknesses list, and then don't forget your second and third parts, by the way, because a lot of directors just look at the first parts. Oh yeah, my first trumpet, my first flute can play this. Look at those. But this time period from the end of marching season through the Christmas concert, that's when you actually determine where your weaknesses are. It's not during marching season because that's a whole different animal. I mean, that's a weird animal, and I love marching season. I love it, and I love concert season. But you're not going to be able to figure out the weaknesses of your band per se during marching season, because you might have 14 people in guard that are flute and clarinet players. And they're not on the field. So you think, oh, my flutes and clarinets are kind of weak this year. No, you got 3 all-staters that are guard students right now, so
Or
kind of
drum
keep that
majors.
in mind. Or drum majors. Yeah. Yeah. Drum majors. So I would throw that out there. Daniel, you got
Yeah,
anything?
no, I totally agree. Christmas is a time for that. I was like
Yeah. We
Jason,
can analyze.
I wasn't doing UIL stuff during Christmas. I was doing Christmas stuff, but you definitely want to analyze it. And that takes me back to another thing. I think young band directors, they when picking their music, especially middle school young men, thinking of texture is a lot of times overlooked. And you're right. So many times we look at that first part, we look at the range, we go, oh, we can do that. But 2 parts isn't hard for us band directors. But when you got 6th graders move into the 7th grade, that's a very difficult thing. And we kind of skip over that. That was very difficult for me to learn as a band director. And I always tried to do. I was in old school that tried to put a lyrical piece, and then it gave me so much trouble doing that. And I wasn't thinking texture near as much early on in my career as I should have been. And it caused me some real problems early on that I was lucky enough I had some people with me that could help me fix some of that. But solos, Derek, when you were asking about that, I definitely did. Sometimes I'd had this incredible player, this 3-year-old player that I want to feature, but I had to go into a list of 10 different pieces that maybe featured that saxophone that I had, because there were 4 or 5 that just the rest of my band could not do or so. So I was always very, if it didn't just fit really good for my band, even though I wanted to feature that kid, or I was just like, I'm sorry, but and you always got that kid that that kid is going, hey, I heard this and I heard this and it features, and I was going, man, that just doesn't fit the rest of the band. But I did think about it with songs, but I would like directors to think texture when they're picking songs and what they can do with that, and how we just think, hey, that wasn't a problem for me. when I was
So
in
Dan,
band, that was it.
so help me. I don't have a real firm definition of what you mean when you say texture.
Just
What are you referring to?
just the inner balance. How deep it, how well is this squared? Like I said, I had to pick pieces. I had such a big band. I had to have a very thick uh, texture in the pieces I played because I had so many. When you got 24 trombones on the stage and you've got all these runs, texture. I'm thinking, is it two parts in the trumpet parts? Is it three parts? Is it one? Have those kids played that type of texture, and do you have the time to teach it? Because it's important that they can play multiple parts and first part, second part, third parts on the clarinets and trumpets as well. But just thinking, do I have the time to teach that? Because we think that kind of the band directors, hey, that wasn't a problem for me when I was playing, but a lot of times it is for these younger kids, especially in these middle schools or these smaller programs, and then they get up to high school and you're playing these things with, very thick scored parts with lots of different parts going on and lots of different runs going on. So I just think that should be a consideration that sometimes we get a little bit overlooked and we just look at that first
So
part and what they can do.
I'm laughing a little bit because one of my favorite parts about going to and often, Dan, you hosted the evaluation at your school. And it's funny to me that you had two-thirds of the student population in your band, and the stage wasn't built for them. And so half of my fun was, are those clarinets and flutes going to fall off the stage when they get excited to start playing? But Jason, I'm going to flip it over to you because I think that you've had the smaller top wind ensemble before. Same considerations for you though, with a thinner group, a smaller group, or a more. I don't want to say select, but you understand my point. You have
No,
fewer
yeah,
instruments.
yeah, yeah. Well, yes and no. Before I get into that, I do want to mention because both Mike and you and Daniel just talked about instrumentation, and we kind of talked about when you're selecting a piece, looking at range, what your individual sections are capable of. But to your point, if I've got two trumpets in my band, you can't pick something that has a split trumpet part. You need to pick something where, I mean, there's a ton of pieces out there where the trumpets and clarinets are in unison for the
Unison,
vast
right?
majority of it. Pick something that's going to give them strength. If you've got three trombones and one euphonium, don't pick something with a split trombone part. Pick something where the euphoniums and trombones are basically in unison. Otherwise, you're putting those kids basically on a solo part for the duration of that piece. And so, picking something like that is something, and thinking about instrumentation is something that becomes important when you're working with those smaller ensembles, because those kids have to play with more confidence, and there is a confidence factor. That's kind of why Daniel was talking about picking old school pieces that are more thickly scored, where there's more unison rhythms, where there's more people playing at the same time, because the kids can play with more confidence. And Mike was talking about this with soloists. I mean, it works in smaller batches, in smaller sections too. When you're split, when you have 9 trumpets and you have 2 firsts, 3 seconds, 3 thirds, you've got to create a section sound. But at the same time, whenever you have the luxury of being able to split into, a top band, second band, third band, you're getting more confident players. You're getting so. I that wasn't something that I worried about too much in terms of just sheer instrumentation. It really came back to what are my strengths and weaknesses. What and what do I know? I can teach this. Yeah, this section of this piece is going to be where I'm really going to have to dig in and get this taught. But either I have to make the determination that I can do it and the kids can do it, or I may have to drag the kids, keep kicking and screaming to make this section work. And then it becomes about my confidence as a teacher and knowing what I'm capable of doing. My first year at Lee, and I know it's Legacy now, but for the 4 years that I was there, it was Lee, so that's what I'll refer to it as.
And I went to school at Lee, not Legacy.
my first year, going to my 2 points, do you know what you're capable of? Do you know what your kids are capable of? I knew what I was capable of teaching. I really did not have a good handle on what they were going to be able to do. So, I pared back. And one of the things that we haven't mentioned that I think is critically important is the duration of your program, because that can become a factor for two reasons. Number one, do they have the stamina to pull it off? And two, are you going to have the class time to get through all of your program?
15 minutes,
And
right?
so yeah, well,
Or whatever.
for I think the most bands get 30 minutes on the evaluation stage. 6/8 get 45 minutes. But like our program that first year at Lee was 15 minutes long. Like, I mean, I played a more challenging program with some of my middle school bands at Capel than I did, but because I didn't know what we were going to be able to do. So even though we were playing off the grade 5 and grade 4, you can't just like pick easy pieces. I mean, they're still going to have substance to them, but how long your program is gonna be a big factor in your success as well.
I think that's a great point. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Mike, I'm going to ask one last question, and I think we kind of maybe we do this again, but for this particular, one of the questions that was asked is how long do I try to make this piece work before I say that's not going to work? Maybe the first read's not good. Do you know the first time you read it, hey, we're doing some good things. Maybe this is something I need to hold on to, or do you say, yeah, no, and
Now,
just kids, let's
for
go to
me,
the next piece.
it's very deceiving because there's pieces out there, a Declaration Overture by Claude T. Smith. It sounds really great the first read, and then it works really well for about 2 weeks, and then it levels off and it never gets any better. It's just how it's written, I suppose. But to answer the question, each piece is different. Always have a punt piece ready. If you got a punt, maybe you got to do it. I think that when you're frustrated with trying to teach the piece and the kids are frustrated and we turn into the beating shall continue until the right notes increase moment, and then no one's happy with anything, and then you might need to do something. I think one thing to alleviate part of that is to my general rule is never have a march that's harder than any of your two concert pieces, and on top of that have an extra march like a 6 note Willie Owens march. Even in my grade 4, my 4A high school top wind ensemble with 3 concert bands, I always had a little tiny simple march just in case. And I think the other thing is this, a general rule: if you're reading through a piece the first time, if you can't get through it reasonably well in that class period without 1,000 stops and starts, it's not meant for that band. I mean, it might be overly dramatic, but I always felt like if I had to force myself through the reading, now if you read it and there's like 2 or 3 places you stopped and there's all kinds of wrong notes, but the kids understood what was happening, then that piece was maybe going to be a good piece for you. But I've seen directors that, you go to the clinic and they can't even, it's like a month before contest, and they can't even play through the piece without stopping, and you're going, this is a problem. A good mentor of mine said to me one time, is someone holding a gun to your head and making you play this? Said, no, sir, no, sir. Then why are you playing this? Said, it's obvious you don't like it now, and the kids don't like it. And I believe Jay Lester can correct me. I think you have 7 calendar days before contest that you can drop a piece and add a piece, and I've done it.
Yeah.
I've done it within 10 days easily. Okay. But yeah, I think the march thing is important. Plus, it's a skill of just being able to know what the band will figure out on their own, and what you have to teach them. If you make them do it 3 times in a row, smart kids will figure out how to play it better without you telling them it is second valve. They'll figure it out if they hear it a couple times. So I'll just leave it on that. But the march thing to me is a real important thing. Never have your march harder than the rest of your program. It's just counterproductive. And there's going to come a time in UIL, I think, where marches will be taken off the criteria. I think they're just going to. I just feel that coming down the road because so many people don't like. I love marches. Don't get me wrong.
Uh,
I love
I love
marches.
marches.
But I think that's going to come down the line somewhere along the way because there's enough people who don't like marches and there's enough people who are playing pieces as marches that don't even sound like marches.
Right.
That I think it's a shame that's our only thing that was ever written for band. That's our
Yeah,
that's our only
that would make
genre.
me sad.
Yeah, that
But
would make
not
me
you.
sad.
That's
I hope
awful.
not. I hope
But
not.
I think that's happening in probably 15 years from now. Mark my words, I think it's going to happen. I don't like it, but I think it's going to happen.
Okay. We got Dan, Jason, anything to add to that before we wrap this up?
Well,
I go ahead, Dan.
no, I was just gonna say to add to that with your question of when do you punt and go, and that changes with your experience as a director. And
Good.
those
That's what I
early
wanted to hear.
directors,
Yeah.
the early directors, you just don't know when to punt. And I would have people come into my band hall and go, okay, that you can't play that, and that doesn't sound good. And then as later on in my career, I was like Mike to where you read it once, twice, and you're going, no,
Yeah,
that
this
that
ain't happening.
that that does not fit what we're doing. And sometimes the kids love it, they think it's good, and I'm like, yeah, hey, sorry, but that's not. So it changes, and that's why I like having the people around. And I'm going to reiterate that used to be you have to get someone in your band hall and and to tell you these things. Your mentors get them in there, and they were coming around. But nowadays in this technological age, I'm amazed at how they directors just like, hey, I just sent you these two songs. We're reading these two songs. What can you tell me about the songs, and what do you think about what we're reading? And uh, that they that was, I didn't get to use that really too much because I was dead to mainly career, but I think that's wonderful. But knowing when to punt is good. I also want to bring back Jason, what he said was super important, and I was very guilty of this. Is I Monday I was working my march, and Tuesday, Wednesday I was working my ballad and my throw piece, and with Thursday, and I would get it, and things were going really well. And the week before contest, we need the stage, and let's play a run through. And in the overture, my band collapses, and their lips are dead, and we're not even halfway through it. And I was just going, "Oh my Lord!"
Because you didn't run your
what?
program all the way
Yeah,
through. Yeah.
what did
Yeah.
I just do? They could play it, but and that's why you see people play their overture, first and their march last. But I have done that to where I was like, I got this thought, but I just realized they can't play all three, you know, and still sound good because they're just wasted. So, thinking ahead and thinking of what could be, and that comes with time, but it also can come with people you trust getting in there that have done it, and getting them in there early, and they don't have to clear it. That's why I want to tell you, you don't have to clear it. Just say, hey, can you listen to this rehearsal? Can you swing by and listen to this rehearsal, and I'll buy you breakfast, but tell me what you think about this. Don't wait until
Cool.
And
All right, guys.
Can't change it.
I think that's probably enough for people to chew on in this go around. If you're open to it, we might have more conversations here in a couple weeks or a month, and say, hey, if this is where you should be at this point, if you're open to it. Other than that, thank you so much for your time. I don't think any of you have a problem, as Daniel just said. Send us an email, askmike@intunemusic.com. I'll get you in contact with these guys. Are you guys open to listening to people's groups and saying, maybe you should think about this, or this piece does that? We good with that?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, so that's today's episode of Ask Mike, Ask Dan, Ask Jason. And
Yeah.
thank you for your time, guys. Hope you all have a great day, great week, and we'll talk again soon, all right?
All right. Thanks for having us.